Hi, welcome to Happy Now Olivia, a channel dedicated to the pursuit of happiness, because you don't have to wait. You can be happy now. I'm Olivia. Today I'm going to talk about nutrition. If emotional health is the linchpin to being happy now, nutrition is the backbone. Food feeds our bodies and our minds, but in today's world we have gotten so far away from what are true, natural, nourishing foods. Foods of convenience may save us time, but they don't promote health, they don't nourish. In fact, they deplete our bodies of fundamental nutrients, and they contribute to our failing health. Technology has brought us incredible freedom, but it hasn't brought us freedom from disease. Industrialized nations are plagued with chronic degenerative diseases. A little over 100 years ago, at the turn of the 20th century, there were still traditional groups of people living in harmony with nature, eating their indigenous diets, mostly untouched and isolated by what was then the rising tide of commerce and industrialization. Dr. Weston A. Price was a Canadian dentist practicing in Cleveland, Ohio. He received his degree in 1893, and for the next 30 years watched as the health of his clients, adults and children, deteriorated. Teeth no longer fit inside children's mouths the way they used to. Their dental arches were too small, their nasal passageways too narrow. They developed rampant tooth decay, and their health was poor overall. Asthma, allergies, and behavioral problems. Dr. Price believed that diseased teeth were a manifestation of ill health, and while the dental and medical professionals of his time were focused on what caused disease, he wanted to find out what promoted health. To that end, he and his wife, who was a nurse, traveled to every corner of the world for almost a decade, visiting 5 different continents and studying 14 different traditional cultures, from the Swiss to the Native Americans, from the Eskimos to the Africans. These people were still living in isolation in remote regions of the world difficult to access. Dr. Price and his wife traveled by prop planes, steamships, automobiles, and on foot to reach these peoples. Dr. Price studied the difference between people living on their traditional diets and the same race of people exposed to modern foods. He tested thousands of samples of traditional foods from around the world for their nutritional content. Without fail, he found that groups of people still living on their traditional diets had a high immunity to tooth decay and all the diseases of modern civilization. In 1939, he published his findings in a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. This is the best book on nutrition I've ever read. Soaking up its knowledge has been one of the most important things I've ever done. Before I go over his seminal research, I'm going to share with you a little bit about my journey into nutrition. If you've watched my biography video, you know I'm half Indian, half Peruvian. Although I was born in India, I grew up in Peru. I was lucky to grow up in a country with fantastic food and a cuisine that has retained a lot of traditional knowledge about nourishment. I was also lucky to have a mother who made sure we ate real food and kept processed food at a minimum in our house. But by the time I was in middle school, I ate my share of junk food and already had several cavities. When I was about 12, my teeth were crowding, they did not fit in my mouth, my incisors were sticking out, and I looked like a vampire. I was embarrassed and afraid to smile. My mom made very little money, but she said it broke her heart that I didn't smile. So she made the sacrifice of getting my sister and I braces. The dentist extracted several of my teeth, and 2 years later I had straight teeth and a smile right before I went to boarding school in the United States. When I was 15 and in boarding school, unfortunately, I became a vegetarian and then a vegan. If you want to know why veganism leads to malnutrition, you can watch my veganism video. But for the next decade, my only focus was on what I didn't eat. It didn't matter what it was, as long as it was quote-unquote vegan. I was so blinded and brainwashed by dogma, and so far away from the traditional foods I grew up with, that I ate things in tubs and boxes with a minimum of 10, 20, 30 unpronounceable ingredients. Today, I don't call those things food. I basically ate cardboard and plastic throughout my college years. When I became a vegan, I developed acne. If you want to know more about that and how to get rid of it, you can watch my acne video. But in my mid-20s, it got so bad, I was so desperate, I considered medications. Then I stopped, took a deep breath, and began looking for natural alternatives. That's when I realized that what I put in my body matters. However, I gravitated to another extreme of eating mostly fruits and vegetables. About 70% of my acne went away, but I was still ignorant, vegan, and starving. For the next 6 years, I removed almost all processed foods from my diet. But it wasn't until my health started to fail that I woke up. I stopped being a vegan when I came across the phenomenal book Gut and Psychology Syndrome by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, which helped me to heal the damage I had done to my body. I realized how important nourishing foods are, and that what I put in my body is equally and perhaps more important than what I don't put in it. If you want to know more about the Gut and Psychology Syndrome, you can watch my GAPS video. But that book led me to the Weston A. Price Foundation, which was founded in 1999, and it disseminates Dr. Price's research on nutrition and the principles of eating a nutrient-dense, whole foods diet to achieve nourishment, vitality, and health. For 3 years, I knew about Dr. Price and followed the principles of wise nutrition, but I hadn't actually read his book until I made this video. Now I'm going to share with you some of his profound research. In order to study the possibility of greater nutritive value in foods grown at high elevations, he traveled to Switzerland in 1931 and 1932. He found an isolated Swiss village of about 2,000 people in the Leuchtental Valley, a mile above sea level. All human requirements, except for a few items like sea salt, had been grown in this village for centuries. The village was almost completely enclosed by 3 mountain ranges, usually snow-capped, with long winters and short summers, followed by rapid, luxuriant growth, the meadows fragrant with alpine flowers. There were no doctors or dentists in this village because they didn't need them. There were also no policemen or jails. Some of the greatest physiques in all of Europe were produced in this and other alpine valleys. There were no trucks, horses, wagons, or tractors to bear the burden of tilling up and down the mountainsides. This was done by the villagers. At the time, the most serious disease in Switzerland was tuberculosis. There was not a single case of this disease in the Leuchtental Valley. Dr. Price believed they were not only physically strong, but strong in spirit. He tested their samples of their food, particularly their dairy products, and found that they were much higher in vitamins than the average commercial products in Europe and America. The cows in the valley spent the warm summers on the verdant knolls and wooded slopes near the glaciers, where they had a period of high and rich productivity of milk. Milk was an important part of the harvest, where boys and men collected hay and rye, and the women and children collected milk and made and stored cheese for the following winter's use. The people of the Leuchtental Valley recognized the superior quality of their June butter and paid homage to it by burning a wick in the first bowl of butter made from luscious summer pasture. The nutrition of the people of the Leuchtental Valley, particularly that of growing boys and girls, consisted of whole rye bread, a slice of summer-made cheese almost as big as a slice of bread, eaten with fresh milk of goats or cows. Meat was eaten about once a week, usually Sundays. The bones and scraps used for soups throughout the week. Some potatoes were available, and limited greens were eaten during the summer. The sturdiness of these people permitted the children to play barefooted and bareheaded in water running down from the glaciers in the evening's chilly breezes. In all the isolated alpine communities Dr. Price studied, the hardihood of the people was splendid. There was hardly any tooth decay or disease. In fact, when Dr. Price examined them and found that at some point there had been tooth decay and then stopped, he asked them if they had ever left the mountains. They said that when they were 18 or 19, they had left for 1 year or 2 years to this city or that city. They had never had tooth decay before or after returning, but they had lost teeth to tooth decay in the short time they were away. Dr. Price's studies of all 14 cultures included the meticulous physical examination of teeth, extensive photographing of subjects, recording of voluminous data, the collection of saliva and food samples for chemical analysis, and the collection of daily detailed information on daily menus, and in many cases, the studies of ancient skeletal remains. For the people of the Alpine valleys, rye was precious, thrashed by hand and ground in stone mills. Each household took turns in using a community-baked oven to bake the month's supply of rye bread. Each village had their own feast days and athletic events, where athletes were fed bowls of cream as the most popular healthful beverage, and special cheeses were made available. Their excellent nutrition provided them with splendid bodies, high immunity to tooth decay and disease. Their dental health was excellent, in spite of never being taught about toothbrushes. Their mouths had the typical deposits of unscrubbed, unwashed mouths, yet they had hardly any cavities. At the same time, with the building of roads and the coming of transportation, modern foods were available in many Swiss villages and towns. White flour bread, jams, sweetened fruit like jams, syrups, confections of every kind were traded for locally produced high vitamin butter and high mineral cheese and rye. In all the communities Dr. Price studied, where people were consuming modern foods liberally, there was severe tooth decay and tuberculosis. The children had deformed dental arches and crowded teeth. The pictures of the people eating their traditional diets versus the ones eating modern foods are worth 1,000 words. On one hand, you have perfect Swiss faces, normal dental arches, and healthy teeth. And on the other, you have children with abscess, crowded, rotted teeth, diseased gums, and abnormal dental arches. The average percentage of teeth attacked by caries in the traditional Alpine communities was 4.6. In the modernized parts, it was 29.8. Wherever the Swiss strayed from their traditional diets of rich dairy, whole rye, some meat and vegetables, and adopted modern processed foods of white flour, sugar, sweets, and canned vegetables, they lost their immunity to tooth decay and became susceptible to modern diseases. The next group of people Dr. Price studied were the isolated and modernized Gaelics. Stories have been told about the superb health of the people living in the islands of the Outer Hebrides. These islands lie off the northwest coast of Scotland. The Isle of Lewis had a population of about 20,000, mostly fisherfolk and sheep raisers. There was so little lime in the soil, there were no trees except for the few that had been planted. The surface of the islands was covered in peat, which contains the rootlets of plant life that grew many centuries ago. The pasturage of the islands was so poor that few cattle were to be found because they could not mature or reproduce. Unlike the Loishental Valley, there were no dairy animals in the Isle of Lewis. The nutrition for these Gaelic peoples consisted of oat products and fish. Oat grain was the only grain that grew readily and provided for porridge and oat cakes, which in many homes were eaten with every meal. Fishing about the Outer Hebrides was particularly favorable. Small seafoods like lobsters, crabs, oysters, and clams were abundant. An important article of nutrition was baked cod's head stuffed with chopped cod liver and oatmeal. Fish eggs and organs were also important. The people of early Scotch descent possessed a physique that was rival that of any found anywhere else in the world. They were characterized by excellent teeth, well-formed faces, and dental arches. Dr. Price marveled at the refinement, intelligence, and strength of character of these rugged people. The principal port at the Isle of Lewis was Stornoway, with a population of about 4,000. In a count of 100 young adults, over half were already wearing artificial teeth. Tooth decay was common in the modernized parts of Stornoway, where you could purchase angel food cake, white bread, jams, highly sweetened fruit juices, and confections of every kind. The difference in the children of Stornoway versus the children in the interior of the Isle of Lewis was striking. In this chapter of Dr. Price's book, there is a picture of two young brothers. The older one is tall, handsome, with perfect teeth, still eating the traditional foods of oatmeal, oatcakes, and fish, and some limited dairy products. The younger brother is squinting at the camera, shaggy looking, missing two front teeth, the rest rotting. He insisted on eating white bread and jam, highly sweetened coffee, and chocolates. His father told Dr. Price with great concern how difficult it was for this boy to get up in the morning and go to work. The average percentage of teeth attacked by caries in the isolated communities of the Outer Hebrides was 1.2. In the modernized parts, it was 30. The next group of people Dr. Price studied were the isolated and modernized Eskimos. The Eskimos living at that time gave us a demonstration of what nature can do in the building of a race capable of withstanding for thousands of years the rigors of an Arctic climate. As long as they were untouched by modern foods, the Eskimos thrived, giving us an example of physical excellence and dental perfection that has seldom been surpassed by any race past or present. Dr. Price traveled to remote regions of Canada and Alaska to study the Eskimos in their native habitat. At the time, the typical Alaskan Eskimo in the 1930s had broad faces, broad dental arches, and perfect teeth, no tooth decay, in spite of the extensive wear on their teeth. They were so strong that Dr. Price was told that the average adult Eskimo could carry 100 pounds in each hand and 100 pounds in his teeth with ease for a considerable distance. In all his encounters with the Eskimos, Dr. Price never heard an Eskimo child cry, unless hungry or frightened by the presence of strangers. The mothers were completely free of dental caries. The Eskimos almost always lived on or near deep water. During salmon running season, they speared fish from their kayaks skillfully, some so large they could hardly lift them. They were also experts at spearing seals, as seal oil was an important item of their nutrition. The nutrition for the Eskimos living in their native state included caribou, ground nuts gathered by mice and stored in caches, kelp gathered in season and stored for winter's use, berries preserved by freezing, flower blossoms and sorrel grass preserved in seal oil, and quantities of frozen fish. Salmon eggs were dried and stored as a special item of nutrition for both children and adults. It was also used to increase fertility in women. Another important item of nutrition were the organs of large sea animals, including certain layers of whale skin, which had been found to be very high in vitamin C. Where the Eskimos strayed from their native diets and adopted modern processed foods, they suffered severe tooth decay. Because there were no doctors or dentists for thousands of miles, their acute pain and suffering from rotted teeth and severe gum disease was prolonged. In 1933, Dr. Price studied isolated and modernized North American Indians. The American Indians provided a remarkable opportunity to study the capacity for a race to adapt to different environments, from the torrid jungles of the tropics to the Arctic. Inside the Rocky Mountain Range, Dr. Price studied the Indians of northern British Columbia and the Yukon Territory. These Indians did not have access to animal life from the sea, not even salmon, because fish did not enter the waterways draining to the Arctic. The winters were so rigorous, they got to 70 degrees below zero. They could not raise cattle or grow seed cereals or fruits. Their nutrition consisted almost entirely of wild animals of the chase. Their wisdom regarding nature's laws and their skill in adapting to the rigorous environment and the limited variety of food has been surpassed by few other tribes in the world. Their knowledge and skill in the use of different animal organs and tissues for the prevention of degenerative disease was superb. Dr. Price asked an old Indian if Indians got scurvy. The Indian said they didn't, Dr. Price asked if it was possible for the Indians to get scurvy. The Indians said it was possible, but the Indian knew how to prevent it and the white man did not. Why then did the Indian not tell the white man? The Indian said the white man knew too much to ask the Indian anything. Dr. Price asked if they would tell him. After consulting with the chief, who said Dr. Price was a friend because he had come to tell the Indians not to eat the food in the white man's store, the Indian described how when they killed a moose, right above the kidney, there were 2 balls of fat they would cut up into as many pieces as there were people in a family, and each would eat their share. They would also eat the walls of the stomach. What the Indians were eating were the adrenal glands and other organs. Modern science had just found out that the adrenal glands are the richest source of vitamin C of any animal or plant tissue. Many of the Indians up and down North America had been displaced to reservations. In these reservations, the majority ate processed foods, refined flours, commercial vegetable oils, canned vegetables, and sweets. They were ravaged by tooth decay and tuberculosis. The Pacific Coast Indians had natively eaten seafoods, but along the reservations in Vancouver and other cities, like most modern people, they ate processed foods, while the government gave them money, automobiles, and modern luxuries. A surgeon who had lived among the Eskimos and Native Americans for 36 years told Dr. Price he had never seen a case of malignant disease among the traditional Eskimos and Native Americans, although it was common among the modernized. Acute surgical problems requiring operations of internal organs, like the gallbladder, kidneys, stomach, and the appendix, were rare among the natives, but they were common among those who became modernized. When the doctors sent them back to their native environments and diets, the majority of the sick recovered. In 1934, Dr. Price traveled to 8 archipelagos of the Pacific, visiting Melanesians and Polynesians in a quest to study groups living in the hot, sultry climates of the tropics. The Melanesians were living in New Caledonia and the Fiji Islands. Early navigators reported these people as being exceedingly strong, vigorously built, beautiful in body and kindly in disposition. In many cases, their only contact with civilization was the call of small trading ships once or twice a year to trade dried coconut meat, seashells, and other products for 90% of the value in white flour or sugar. The other 10% were clothes or clothing materials. The missionaries in these islands encouraged the natives to adopt the habits of modern civilization. They induced them to cover their bodies, especially when in sight of strangers. This reduced the traditional practice of coating the body with coconut oil, which absorbed ultraviolet rays, preventing injury from the tropical sun. The Melanesians believed they required seafood to maintain health, but these islands were under French control, and many natives were subjugated to work in sugar plantations and forced to eat modern processed foods. The Melanesians of New Caledonia were equally strong, excellent warriors, a happy, smiling people, but they were British subjects. Wherever the islanders worked on sugar plantations and strayed from their native foods, they suffered from severe tooth decay. There were no doctors or dentists because they had never needed them on their traditional diets. The pictures of these once originally happy islanders are heartbreaking. You can see the absolute pain and desolation in their eyes. There's a picture of a little boy no more than 6 years old, with abscess, crowded, rotted teeth, a cloth wrapped around his head to contend with the pain. There is so much sadness in his eyes. The pain of abscessed teeth with no hope for relief was such that many of these islanders were driven to suicide. I understand some of this physical pain. I've had tooth and jaw pain, and it's the worst pain I've ever had. It's not just pain, it's frustration at not being able to eat, and desperation at the thought you'll never be able to eat again. But I was lucky to have access to modern, holistic, natural dentistry, which helped me to stop and reverse the damage I did to myself when I starved my body of essential nutrients as a vegan. Many of these people in these cultures did not have that privilege. And like many people in our societies today, They had no idea, even as they suffered, that the modern processed foods they were eating were destroying their bodies from the inside out. The Polynesians were living in the Hawaiian, Marquesas, and other islands. Early navigators were so impressed with the health and beauty of the Polynesians that they reported the Marquesas as being the Garden of Eden. At the time, they were a dying and sick native group, ravaged by tuberculosis, where they strayed from their natural foods and adopted the foods of modern civilization. They suffered from disease and tooth decay. In 1935, Dr. Price studied isolated and modernized Africans. The Great Plateau of Central and Eastern Africa has produced scores of tribes with superb physiques and much accumulated wisdom. It was important for Dr. Price to study these people, to note how they had solved the problem of living in so severe and disciplining an environment in Africa, as Africa. Dr. Price traveled 6,000 miles and had contact with 30 tribes. The health and ruggedness of the Africans was exemplary, but it was not solely due to race. The same racial tribes exposed to modern foods suffered from physical degeneration like all other cultures. Many of the Europeans Dr. Price encountered could not live in Central Africa for 2 years without serious illness or distinct evidence of physical stress. Dysentery was so common and severe that Dr. Price and his team could not eat anything they hadn't cooked themselves. They boiled all their drinking water. They did not touch their feet to the bare ground for fear of jiggers burrowing into their skin. Rarely after sundown could they step behind their mosquito nets for fear of malaria. Diseased ticks were so abundant in the grass and shrubbery, they had to constantly remove them from their clothes. There was also great fear in the lice that infected the hides the native Africans wore. And they could not go to many districts for fear of the tsetse fly and the sleeping sickness it carried. The Africans had a unique immunity that was largely passed down to their kids. In many districts, the majority of natives had had typhus fever and were immune, though the lice in their bodies could transmit the disease. A doctor working in a government hospital in Kenya told Dr. Price that in all his years of service, he had never observed the natives to suffer from appendicitis, gallbladder problems, or ulcers, and malignancy was rare. The Nilotic tribe of the Maasai were characterized by superb physical excellence, great bravery, and mental acumen. They were herders of goats and cattle, and primarily lived on dairy products, including blood and milk. Some meat was eaten, and a limited percentage of plant foods. They are known to have known for 200 years that malaria was carried by mosquitoes, and they practiced exposing members of their tribes to malaria who had been infected by syphilis from the Arabs to malaria to prevent injury from the infection. Yet modern medicine boasted being the discoverer of the principle of using malaria to relieve or prevent serious syphilis infections from the spinal cord and brain. The Maasai milked their cows daily and bled steers at regular intervals. Whenever available, each child got a day's ration of blood, as did pregnant women and lactating women. Almost all the tribes had special diets during gestation and lactation. Some African tribes were agricultural, living on sweet potatoes, corn, beans, millet, and some bananas, but they were not as physically or mentally strong as the Maasai. The Maasai used their own spears to protect their herds against lions and other predatory animals with no fear. It's amazing that such a strong and courageous people, immune to the natural plights of their own continent, became susceptible to modern diseases including tooth decay when they adopted the foods of modern civilization. Dr. Price also studied Australian Aborigines, Torres Strait Islanders, the New Zealand Maori, and the ancient civilizations of Peru and their living descendants, each remarkable in their health and wisdom, each suffering from mental and physical degeneration when they adopted the foods of modern civilization. Of the elements of which the human body is composed, several are needed in small quantities. Some are needed in liberal quantities. Few people get more than 1/2 to 1 gram of the minerals present in food. In modern society, new diseases are being associated with vitamin deficiencies every day. The vitamins and minerals utilized by the human body depend directly on the presence of other substances, particularly fat-soluble vitamins. In addition to that, adults and children vary in the efficiency with which they absorb minerals. It is possible to starve for minerals that are abundant in the foods eaten, because the human body cannot utilize them without an adequate quantity of fat-soluble activators. This makes necessary the reinforcement of nutrition with definite amounts of special foods to supply those fat-soluble activators. The traditional cultures Dr. Price studied knew this instinctively. They used at least one of 3 sources to provide them with these fat-soluble activators, namely seafoods, organs of animals, and dairy products. These are all of animal origin. Dr. Price did not find one single traditional race who were building and maintaining healthy and strong bodies by living entirely on plant foods. In many parts of the world, he found devout representatives of modern ethical systems, advocating the restriction of foods of the plant products. In every instance where people had been living solely on plant foods for long, he found evidence of physical degeneration. To illustrate the importance of fat-soluble activators in foods, let's look at 2 cases from Dr. Price. During a severe period of the Depression in the 1930s in America, a minister called Dr. Price because he had been called to baptize a dying child. The minister thought the problem was probably nutritional and asked Dr. Price for help. The boy was badly emaciated, had rampant tooth decay, a bronchial cough, one leg in a cast which had been fractured 3 months earlier due to a fall from one of his convulsions which happened in rapid succession. His diet consisted of white bread and skim milk. For mending the fracture, the boy needed minerals: calcium, phosphorus, magnesium. His convulsions were due to low calcium content in the blood. Dr. Price prescribed a change from white bread to wheat gruel made from freshly ground wheat, and the substitution of whole milk for skim milk, along with teaspoonfuls of high vitamin butter, with each feeding 5 times a day. 6 weeks later, the boy was fully recovered, running and jumping like a normal boy. In another case, a mother called Dr. Price to ask for help in developing a nutritional program for her 5-year-old son who had been in bed in hospitals with rheumatic fever, arthritis, and acute heart problems, most of the time for the past 2.5 years. She had been told he would not recover, his complications were so severe. As is usually the case with rheumatic fever and endocarditis, the boy had severe tooth decay. Dr. Price removed refined flours and sugars as much as possible from his diet and replaced them with freshly ground cereals for gruels and breads. Bone marrow was included in his stews. Liver, fresh whole milk, green vegetables and fruits were provided, as well as high vitamin butter made from cows grazing and rapidly growing green grass. With the improvement in his nutrition, which was the only change made to his care, his acute pain subsided, his appetite returned, he slept soundly and gained weight. Within a year, he was fully recovered. These 2 practical cases illustrate the importance, the fundamental necessity that there shall not only be an adequate quantity of body-building minerals present in the food, but also an adequate quantity of fat-soluble activators like butter. The traditional cultures Dr. Price studied did not know the names of the minerals and vitamins in their foods, but they had an accumulated wisdom of centuries of knowing which foods in their various environments provided them with the greatest nutrition to build and maintain strong and healthy bodies, and to give birth to strong and healthy babies. all the cultures have special diets, even richer in nutrients, for pregnant women and children. In order to get nourishing foods, we need fertile soils. What is soil fertility? In simple words, some dozen chemical elements in mineral and rock combinations in the Earth's crust, which are slowly being broken off and hustled off into the ocean, where they eventually end up in our soils. Soil fertility determines whether plant foods are only foods of fattening and fuel, or nourishing foods in the service of growth and reproduction. In nature's plan, minerals are loaned temporarily to plants and animals, and their return to the soil in natural form is essential. Modern civilization has brought us incredible technology and freedom, but that progress has come at a cost to our health. When we modify nature's foods, we pay a price. The more natural foods are modified, the more they're stripped of their essential vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, and the more human bodies degenerate. There has been a marked tendency in modern civilization to substitute synthetic foods for nature's foods. If this were working, we wouldn't be so sick and plagued with degenerative diseases. Our biggest problem today is not war, it's modern malnutrition, which leads to chronic mental and physical degeneration. Some of the faces of modern physical degeneration we don't even question. We would consider it a great disgrace to burn the furniture in our houses for warmth if fuel were available. Yet this is precisely what we're doing to our skeletons by a process of borrowing. We're all familiar with the misfortune that befalls many elderly people through the accident of a broken hip, some of those fractures never uniting. The case I mentioned earlier of the boy with a fractured leg, who fractured it due to a fall from one of his convulsions. He didn't fracture it because the blow was hard. He fractured it because he had been borrowing for months from his skeleton due to the lack of minerals and vitamins in the inadequate foods he was eating. Another aspect of borrowing has to do with the progressive shrinking of the skeleton. Some people lose 2 to 6 inches in a decade or two. Our bodies need a certain amount of fresh minerals every day. If they're not provided in the foods we eat, they will be taken from our storage depot, the skeleton. Even ununited fractures can be induced to unite through an adequate reinforcement of nutrition. This is not just the case for young people, but also the elderly. In nature, all animals have the instincts to choose the most nutritious foods for their natural development. The wonderful traditional cultures Dr. Price studied had those instincts as well. Even in our fast-paced digital world, if we slow down and pay attention, we have those instincts too. When I was a kid growing up in Peru, synthetic margarine was in vogue, but my mom had the common sense never to buy it. When I tried it at a friend's house, I thought it was absolutely revolting, completely and utterly unpalatable. Even as a kid, I just wanted my real butter. When I was indoctrinated as a vegan, I suppressed my instincts and forced myself to eat imitation products I can't even call food. In order to make processed foods palatable and visually pleasing, they're laden with a concoction of toxic chemicals. Not only that, but we have to contend with depleted soils, pesticides, and genetically modified foods, among other challenges. Nutrition and Physical Degeneration is a masterpiece of a book. Dr. Weston A. Price was a man ahead of his time and devoted to helping mankind. I cannot express in words how much I recommend this book for what it has done for my life. If you want to know more about everything I've talked about, nutrition, physical degeneration, traditional cultures, the effects of soil depletion on our foods, the effects of malnutrition on mental health, then read this book. As always, I link below the video anything I recommend and additional information. Dr. Price was open and generous about compiling his research in an accessible way, avoiding technical language to make it more widely available. He was also caring of the traditional cultures he studied, and their inevitable decline once they came in contact with modern foods. He wanted their wisdom and knowledge passed on, but he also wanted them to know that their traditional diets were keeping them healthy and free of disease. Dr. Price's work has empowered me with the knowledge to make wise decisions about my health and the health of my family. For his work and the courageous people who champion it, I'm truly grateful. I thank the Price Pottinger Foundation for keeping his work alive and for making this book available to individuals who, like me, have stumbled upon it as if discovering the fountain of youth, excited and motivated to reach a level of health and nourishment that is possible, tangible, and within our grasp. I thank the Weston A. Price Foundation for disseminating Dr. Price's research and the ancient wisdom of these traditional cultures, and for continually giving me the knowledge to help myself. Dr. Price was a scientist in the truest sense of the word. He had a boundless curiosity, a steadfast determination, and the integrity to present to the world facts as he saw them. He knew his research could change people's lives from disease to health. So what do we do on a day-to-day basis when we're presented with so much information on nutrition, much of it overwhelming and misleading? Nutrition and health is not a one-size-fits-all approach. In all the different 14 cultures Dr. Price studied, many of them ate widely different foods to accommodate for their radically different environments, yet they were all happy, healthy, and free of disease. Dr. Price outlined the basic principles of wise nutrition present in all these cultures. The basic principles of wise nutrition are to avoid modern processed foods that lead to chronic mental and physical degeneration. And equally, and perhaps more important, to include nourishing foods as much as possible in our diets. Nourishing foods are high in vitamins and minerals. They are freshly caught seafoods, fish eggs whenever possible, fresh whole milk, and dairy products. Meats from pasture-raised animals, especially organ meats, free of hormones and genetically modified foods. Eggs from free-range chickens, organic vegetables and fruits, and organic whole grains prepared properly. We also have to do what we can to support organic farmers and biodynamic farmers who are producing natural, healthy, fresh food while enriching the soil in a sustainable way. It takes instinct, willpower, strength of character, and the application of ancient wisdom to choose the foods that are right for our bodies versus the foods we may like. The Indians of the high Andes were willing to travel hundreds of miles to the sea to gather kelp and fish eggs for the use of their people, especially pregnant women and children. There are so many quote-unquote health diets out there, so many people profiting by attaching their names or fad theories to a diet. Dr. Price did not, as if health and nutrition were the purview of a few enlightened individuals. Dr. Price did not see health and nutrition as an avenue to make money. He saw the absence of disease and the unchanging principles of health and nutrition as knowledge that rightfully belongs to us. It's knowledge that's ingrained in our DNA, that's been passed down through generations by our ancestors. Thanks to pioneers like Dr. Price, this knowledge belongs to us. Thanks to technology, it's at our fingertips. Thanks to progress, the foods we need to thrive can be accessible. It's up to us to take charge of our health. The human body is so resilient. I still marvel at the fact that I starved my body for 16 years, yet how quickly it responded once I began to nourish, once I began to eat the wonderful, wholesome foods I was meant to. Each cell in my body rejoiced with increased energy, and I think gratitude for being able to function the way they were meant to. As you eat nourishing foods, trust yourself, trust your instincts, trust your health, and the health and vitality of your children and your family. If you're the cook in your family, you're the gatekeeper of their health. I happen to have this incredible responsibility in my family, and it's such a joy, not only to nourish myself, but to nourish the people I love, to watch them thrive, to watch them be happy and healthy. Without adequate nutrition, we can't sustain human life throughout generations, let alone reach our full potential. The ancient wisdom of humankind is in our instincts if we stop and listen to our senses. If we open our minds and hearts, the knowledge of lifetimes belongs to us. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and consider subscribing so you can get the latest Happy Now Olivia video. In addition to that, I'd love to hear in the comments below how the knowledge of traditional cultures has affected your health and nutrition. Remember, happiness is an active choice. You don't have to wait. You too can be happy now. Thanks for watching. See you next time.